And I took him over there, and I did the introduction 30 minutes before the show, and Christopher Cross wasn't even there yet, but my son was fascinated by the number of guitars that Chris had on stage. At that time, my son was interested in learning how to play the guitar. 2 years later, I was at a convention, and Christopher Cross was there. I said, would you do me a favor? He goes, what? I said, would you talk to my son? So I got Chris on the phone to talk to my son. These people are just so cool.
And there's the voice of radio disc jockey Dave Mason. And last time we talked about narrowcasting, and our conversation continues now about that topic. I remember a couple of years ago, I was talking with a call screener here at the radio station who was friends with Jeff Levy, who used to host the computer show on KFI, and then he was lured to KNX when David G. Hall moved over to CBS Radio. And I don't think David got a good budget for doing what he wanted to do. I think he wanted to make KNX like KGO up in San Francisco, and then KFWB would be all news all the time. So he hired both Melinda Leaf on cooking and Jeff Levy on computers to go to KNX. But Jeff said to my friend, he said, the problem with the station is, as soon as I get to a call, I said, can you hold on for a second? We got to get to the news. And then, so it's too much news for those who want computers, but then too much computer talk for those who want news. So it was like a losing proposition either way. And I think Jeff did eventually go to KABC when David G. Hall took over there, and then I think he had his own podcast for a couple of years until he passed away. But just it wasn't always cracked up to be.
No, again, LA is such a big market, and there's so much going on. And when you talk about narrowcasting, that's what people have to do these days to keep on going.
Now, tell us about your favorite radio stations you worked at on the East Coast.
Working at BBF was great. It was, again, the big top 40 in town. And it was fun in the fact that, we pretty much cleaned up the market. And, all the stations I worked for were so good. They really were. The one station that I worked for in Binghamton, we had a 75 share in teens at night. So I'd say that was pretty successful. There were 4, maybe 5 radio stations that people had that you could choose from. So, what else could they do? And they didn't have streaming. They didn't have, they had 8 tracks and stuff like that. But it was a phenomenal time to be in the business.
Now, when you hosted that teen show, was there any type of specialty tunes you play? For instance, when Bob Eubanks was on KRLA 1110, he hosted the Teen Toppers show, where each night a different high school would be saluted with the top 60 tunes as voted by that particular high school. Did you do anything like that? Yeah,
we weren't doing that. We didn't have to do it. And that was the crazy part about it. We didn't have to, so we didn't. We could do shout-outs to high schools and people who would call in, but we didn't really have to go that far. And, we could do a remote on the weekend and take the van out and broadcast. And people would just show up because we were there. That's all it took. It was a crazy time.
Wow. And what were some contests that you put out that were unique? Because I've heard about these like zany contests that different markets put out. Was there anything unique to the markets you were in?
Well, yeah, we did the phrase that pays, which was simple as making a phone call and saying, "Hey, what radio station you listen to?" And it started, even asking the question, it started out by people having to answer their phone. I listened to the new sound of BBF, and the jackpot for that would grow after we make a call. And if the person who answered the phone said hello, we'd explain to them what was happening, and if you'd answered the phone, you could have won $10,000. It was big. It was very big for the city. We did that in a lot of places. They did it in Pittsburgh as well. Before I got to Pittsburgh, the station was 13Q, and it was one that, again, came in and it just took over the market. They had an armored truck going around town, and they would just stop people on the street and say, "Okay, here's $100. Listen to 13Q."
Wow.
It was crazy. It was crazy. The station went from nowhere to number one. And if you remember Jackson Armstrong, he worked there. Mark Driscoll worked there. This was before my time. I was lucky enough to get there after Heftel had sold the station to Nationwide, and the new owners weren't spending anywhere near as much money on the station. So, we were trying to beat competition with maybe one arm tied behind our back.
Wow.
It didn't work out quite as well, to be honest with you.
Now,
but again, that's radio.
Yeah, exactly. Now, what were some of the concerts that you got to introduce in the various markets you worked at over the years?
One of my favorite stories is Harry Chapin. Harry came into town in Pittsburgh to do a client party for our advertisers, and it was a great night. It was a great, fun evening, and we were the wine was flowing, to say the least. And in the midst of it all, Harry's on stage. I was in the front row, and I'm singing along with him. And at one point, he stopped. He glared at me. Apparently, I was singing too loud. So I stopped, and he finished the concert. Well, 3 years later, I was in Rochester at the time. I get a phone call from the record company saying, Harry Chapin's coming in to do a concert. We need to get him run him a car. I said, I tell you what, I'll go pick him up at the airport and take him to the auditorium. He goes, oh, okay. So I picked up Harry and his pilot. They're in the back seat. I'm driving into the theater for the show. I said, Harry, I want you to a show you did 4 years ago in Pittsburgh. In the middle of it all, you stopped the show because somebody was singing too loud. He goes, yeah, I think I remember that. I said, well, it was me. He goes, oh. I said, I just want to apologize. So I did. And 6 months later, he had his accident on the Long Island Freeway and died. So I did that. Let's see, who else? Jan and Dean. I introduced them twice here in California. Mm-hmm. And I actually emceed the last Jan and Dean concert ever because 3 months after their concert in El Cajon, Jan passed away. Introduced the Beach Boys, Gordon Lightfoot, Judy Collins, Petula Clark. Most of that happened here in San Diego, which I thought was kind of cool.
Yeah.
In Buffalo, Christopher Cross was doing a show at the Buffalo Zoo, and my son at the time, I think he was probably 5, and I took him over there, and I did the introduction. I did that 30 minutes before the show, and Christopher Cross wasn't even there yet, but my son was fascinated by the number of guitars that Chris had on stage. And at that time, my son was interested in learning how to play the guitar. Well, 2 years later, I was at a convention, and Christopher Cross was there. I said, would you do me a favor? He goes, what? I said, would you talk to my son? So I got Chris on the phone to talk to my son. It was very cool. I mean, stuff like these people are just so cool. And just, asking them to do something, they don't have to do it. Mm-hmm. But in a lot of cases, they'll do it.
Is your son playing guitar today?
No, actually, he's a flight manager for an air ambulance company. I don't know why. It's just that, people get distracted from things in life. But he did take guitar lessons, and he did do a pretty good job with it.
Wow. It's great to hear about Christopher Cross. And his music was really it really defined the mellow rock sound of the late 70s, early 80s. And something else that a lot of people probably don't know, maybe they do, is that Michael McDonald does background vocals on Christopher Cross's hit Ride Like the Wind.
Yeah. Well, Michael McDonald did backgrounds with everybody.
That's true, yeah.
There was a time when it was him and Stevie Nicks. They were doing background vocals.
That's right. Did you ever get to meet those two musicians?
I met Michael. We did a thing called Live from L.A. We brought our morning show in Pittsburgh out here to Carlos and Charlie's on Sunset Boulevard. A guy put together, he had 14 radio stations during Grammy Week. Mm-hmm. And he went out and he was a publicity hound. He told everybody he could think of, if you've got something to publicize during this week, we're going to have 14 radio stations in town. And we're sitting in the upstairs, Carlos and Charlie's, and he's walking people through, going from station to station. So, we got to meet Michael McDonald, got to meet Wolfman Jack, we got to meet Gene Hackman from Entertainment Tonight, Mary Hart. I mean, it was an amazing week, and it was kind of fun. But they're here in Los Angeles, and it's not difficult to find them. You just have to get to the point of not bothering them. Mm-hmm. And if they want to talk to you, they will. We were at the Grove one day having lunch when I worked at K-Earth, and I could swear Robert Downey Jr. walked by.
Wow, he probably did.
And it had to be him. I didn't say anything, but I went to the people I'm with. I think I just saw Robert Downey Jr. They're going, yeah, okay. So,
yeah, I remember about 18 years ago, I was auditioning for a TV commercial, and in the hallway was a gentleman, probably in his late 40s, early 50s, with gray, thinning hair, and he was talking about the Dick Donner cut of Superman 2. And so I was fascinated by that because I'm a big Superman fan. And then I went into the bathroom, and it just dawned on me right there. It's like, oh my gosh, Mark McClure, Jimmy Olsen.
wow.
And so I got out of the bathroom, I shook hands with him and said, hey, I love your work, and then went into my audition. But then about 20 minutes later, I went down to the Trader Joe's just down the road from there, and guess who was there? It was Mark McClure, and we had a great 20-minute conversation, very, very friendly, and it's a moment I won't forget.
You never know what's going to happen. A good friend of mine, back in the day in Rochester, he says, hey, we're going to this nightclub. It's an after-hours club, and my buddy Don and his band are playing. I went, okay. So I went with him, and I thought, this is really good. And it really was. But it was an after-hours club. They opened up at 1 o'clock in the morning after the bars closed, and they played, and people came in and played till 4. It's kind of a jazz, kind of, not country, but some R&B stuff. Mm-hmm. And this guy and his band always put on a good show. We put them on the air on our station, a little 1,000-watt AM station. We put them on the air from 1 until 4 in the morning. And we would promote it during the week, of course. And the place was called the Music Room. It was live from the Music Room. It was Don Potter and his band. One night, Don says, Chuck Mangioni's going to be here. Chuck is from Rochester. Mm. And so I go on the air at 1 o'clock in the morning and say, here we are at the Music Room. I just want you to know that... and he always had a good crowd. They couldn't serve alcohol because it was after hours. And they would serve, light snacks and soft drinks. And I said, we understand that Chuck Mangioni's going to be here. And within an hour, the line was around the block, people waiting to get in to see this guy. Mm. And I thought, this is just phenomenal. Just phenomenal. It was just the power that we had. And again, this is 1980, maybe 81. 1,000-watt AM station. We were usually third or fourth in the market. And here it is. It's 2 o'clock in the morning, and we got people lined up around the block waiting to get into a nightclub. I mean, it was just the power of what we could do, what the media could do, because it was stuff we did that nobody else did. Mm-hmm. So right about the time I was leaving Rochester to go to Buffalo, the guy who ran the club was closing up the club, and he said, yeah, I'm moving to Nashville. I got a songwriting job that I'm going to get down there. I went, okay. Well, he got down there. The job didn't exist. He had to rely for, that would have been 81. So 3 or 4 years he had to work doing carpentry work and doing basically home improvement. Well, I called one day. I'd gotten to Cincinnati by then. And I called, and his wife answered the phone. I said, how's it going? She says, good. Don's on the road. And he's found this act that he's working with right now. He's kind of producing them and trying to get their sound right. And I said, she said, yeah, it's a mother-daughter group, and they're called the Judds.
Wow.
So he was their first producer. And again, as down-to-earth as it could possibly be, he's very devout, born-again Christian. He has a ministry. I think it's in North Carolina now, because they lived in Nashville at the time. He was a session musician. So, and he played with anybody who was everybody. But he was helping the Judds get off the ground, and it worked.
Now, what was his name again? Repeat that, because
Don Potter. I forget the label that he's been on, but he's put out a whole bunch of albums himself. Yeah, in addition to Chuck Mangione, you got the Judds, of course, Reba McEntire, Toby Keith. I'm glancing right now as we go through the website. Kenny Chesney, Michael Johnson. Wow. Yeah, Don's worked with many of them. I mean, anybody who's had to go through Nashville, the people have hired Don because he's a great guitar player, easy to work with. Real easy to work with. That's great.
We're talking with radio personality Dave Mason, and next time he talks about his 2 years in Nashville as well as his journey to San Diego.